Hi, ladies. I hope everyone had a wonderful fall break and that you're ready to get going again here with class. It's hard to imagine that we're already halfway through and you just have a few more weeks left. So, I just want to remind you first about some homework this week. You have on Tuesday, discussion number 3, do your initial post. And then on Thursday, you have to comment on someone else's. And on Friday, you're going to turn in a works cited page. You need 4 outside sources, and this can be either APA or MLA style. Okay, that's due on Friday. So, as far as the reading that you're going to do this week, actually, it's really interesting material. The first chapter is going to be about the Renaissance, the second about the origin of the Reformation. So I want you to recall something that you read prior to this, and that was about the Black Death. And remember, this is the bubonic plague and how it spread through Europe, and about a third of the people died. And so everyone really questioned their own mortality, asked a lot of existential questions, and really, were grieving. And their kind of reaction to that grief was partly how, anyway, the Renaissance was born. And the Renaissance kind of happened in both the North and the South. And so, kind of Germany and Italy, if you will, there's lots of other places, but those were the big kind of hubs of it. And it kind of took a couple of different forms. In the South, the Medicis were a wealthy banking family, and they were patrons of the art. And so they were paying people top dollar to do a lot of artwork. And this kind of inspired a lot of the really famous art of the Renaissance. Also, the printing press was invented. And this, I think, is one of the most important inventions. In fact, in the year 2000, they released a list of the top 1,000 inventions of all time, and the printing press was number 1. And of course, the thing that has been printed more than anything else is the Bible. And this really spread the ability to be literate, and people in the middle class and the lower class were being educated now, and they could read the Bible for themselves and not just hear about the Bible from other people. And they could read other things like classic pieces of writing by the church fathers. And so education really spread thanks to the printing press, and really opened and expanded people's minds. And so when Martin Luther came along, what Luther had to say was suddenly printed in a way that everyone could read it too, which is kind of important. Also, they kind of focused on some of the classics like Greek and Latin pieces of writing, and the focus was on the human person and on individuals, whereas before this, in the medieval times, they really focused on the next life and kind of what was good for the whole. And now in the Renaissance, they're really thinking about this life and all of the joys and pains of this life, and also, what's best for the individual versus the whole group. And so that was kind of an important part of it too. They also had a big focus on the natural world. And of course, if you look at any Renaissance art, you'll see that there's just a real focus on the human body and trying to be very realistic with that. One thing that happened more in the North and the South, and that in the North, their Renaissance dealt a lot more with education and more of intellectual rebirth. And so one thing that developed was a new way of kind of interpreting the Bible, because they had such access to history and history books. And now they could put the passages from the Bible into the historical context and hear them that way, which changed some of its meaning. So this historical criticism of the Bible became more common at the time. So essentially, in the North, you have a rebirth of education and intellect. And in the South, in general, it was more of a rebirth with the arts. And again, this kind of set the stage for Martin Luther. So the chapter 18th is all about Martin Luther. And I'll just tell you a little bit about him and some of his ideas, but you'll read the rest in the chapter. So he basically became a monk after he was struck by lightning. And when he was struck by lightning, he prayed to St. Anne and promised that if he survived, he would become a monk. And true to his word, after he survived, a week later, he did join a monastery. And he was an Augustinian Catholic priest. And I just think it's important for everyone to remember that he was a Catholic priest, and when he was disturbed with things going on in the church, he didn't set out to start a whole new church, but rather to reform the Catholic Church from within. So some of the things, he was a Bible scholar, so some of the things that bothered him dealt with the Bible and how people were teaching some things that weren't found in the Bible. And so for him, everything that the church teaches should come straight from the Bible. He also took some issue with some of the sacraments, reconciliation, the talk about the actual change in the bread and wine into the body and blood of Jesus bothered him about the Eucharist, and he just didn't really see the point of some of the sacraments. He also really was asking the question about how are we saved, and the word he used to describe this is justified, or what's the way that we're justified. And so he felt like the way that we were saved was through our faith alone, and it didn't have anything to do with our works. Also, a big problem at the time, a big corruption, was the selling of indulgences. There were priests who were saying, pay me this money and I can save you time in purgatory. And this wasn't all priests, but there was a priest that lived near Luther. His name was John THL, and he was probably one of the worst